Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Built to Stay, a candid conversation on future-proofing your development team. I'm Adam Fazio, Vice President and Partner at Benefactor. We're very excited you could join us. We are just going to pause here for a couple minutes to give folks a second to get settled, admitted from the waiting room, and then we'll dive in with content in just a moment. All right, excellent. Well, let's dive in here. Thank you all again for joining us. Adam Fazio with Benefactor Group. We are thrilled that you could join us here today. This is an exciting conversation and a really important time to be thinking about development talent. Expectations for fundraisers continue to grow, and so does the opportunity to build teams that are effective, not only for today, but sustainable for the future. In today's conversation, we'll share some practical insights from our work in executive search and capacity building to talk a little bit about what strong development infrastructure looks like. Together, we'll explore the current climate in the nonprofit sector, its impact on hiring and retention, and then we'll talk about how clarity and transparency in roles and structures can set teams up for success from day one. That includes an intentional investment in people and structure, which helps organizations retain and develop great talent over time. We are looking forward to a candid and engaging conversation and hope that you'll leave with some ideas that you can put into practice right away. We will start with an overview of the landscape, why people leave positions, but more significantly, why they stay. We'll talk about the necessary conditions for success and staff retention, and the support that Benefactor Group can provide to help address those challenges and set you up for success long term. We will begin with a presentation from our panel, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. You are welcome to ask questions and add your personal experiences at any point during the webinar. We'll do our best to address as many of those questions as possible during the presentation and in the discussion that follows. Our colleague Courtney Smith is with us here today. She's monitoring the Q&A and will elevate questions to our panel during the conversation and will facilitate the Q&A at the end. And finally, we are recording the presentation today. After this presentation, you'll receive the slide deck and any resources that we mention in a follow-up email, so you'll have everything that you need to reference later on. Before we dive in, a little bit about Benefactor Group and who we are. Since our founding by Laura McDonald over 25 years ago, Benefactor Group has served the needs of those who serve the common good. We work with clients across the US in healthcare, arts and culture, educational institutions, and human services organizations, with a comprehensive continuum of services designed to support nonprofit organizations at transformational moments, all with the goal of ensuring they have the fundraising, the people, and the systems in place to fuel their missions. And I'm joined today by two people who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in philanthropy and fundraising. So we'll go around briefly, introduce ourselves and our work, and then we'll dive in. So I'm Adam Fazio. I'm a vice president and partner at Benefactor Group, where I lead our executive search and talent practice. In that work, I guide nonprofit organizations through critical change moments. That includes leadership transitions, and I help organizations build strong and sustainable teams that drive long-term impact. Before I joined Benefactor Group, I spent more than 15 years in nonprofit leadership roles, grounded in talent management, strategic planning, operations, program evaluation, and fundraising. And with that, I'd like to turn it to my colleague, Summers.
Thank you so much, Adam. My name is Summers Hamill, and I am a senior consultant, and I lead the capacity building practice at Benefactor Group. My background is working with and for nonprofits, and today I partner with nonprofit leaders and boards to strengthen internal systems, leadership structures, and fundraising strategies that support long-term growth and sustainability. My work includes organization-wide assessments, campaign planning and execution, and development strategy across the arts and culture, health, human services, and education sectors. My experience primarily roots in nonprofit development, grant strategy, and managing complex multi-stakeholder grant-funded initiatives. And I'm proud to be an active contributor to the Giving Institute's Programs and Education Committee. With that, I will turn it over to Pontier to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Summers. I'm Pontier Sacri, Chief Advancement Officer at the National Museum of Wildlife Art. It's my great fortune to work at the Benefactor Group. In fact, I even brought along my my mug. It says Benefactor Group on it, my awesome tea in there. So our advancement team is comprised of 3 departments: development, events, and marketing. And together we strive to advance our museum to new and existing audiences and to also strengthen our long-term philanthropic strategy.
Pontier, I'm going to have you tell us a little bit about the National Museum of Wildlife Art.
Sure. So we are in Northwest Wyoming in Jackson Hole. If you're a little unfamiliar with our beautiful state, our museum was founded in 1987 and is home to 5,000 cataloged objects celebrating wildlife from around the world. We're dedicated to one clear purpose: to impart knowledge and generate wonder through art and education. Nationally recognized for our collection and interpretation of wildlife art, we showcase work that connects people to the natural world. Our collection spans from 2500 BCE to today and features artists such as Georgia O'Keeffe, John James Audubon, Andy Warhol, Carl Rungius, and many more. Our museum is built into a hillside overlooking the National Elk Refuge, just a few miles from Grand Teton National Park, which is the gateway to the iconic Yellowstone National Park. And our setting is really quite literally the place where conversation of art in conversation with wildlife and the environment can naturally occur. Philanthropy is central to our impact and absolutely key. In 2025, and in partnership with our executive director and board of directors, our team raised $21 million for annual programs, endowment, and a very special initiative that will advance our mission long term. This level of generosity reflects both the strength of our community and the importance of our work. We have a development team of 7 people, and when I started at the museum 6 years ago, we had 3. And this growth reflects our board's recognition that expanding our philanthropic resources requires a corresponding investment in the philanthropic team.
Thanks, Pontier. I would get the privilege of talking a little bit about our partnership with the National Museum of Wildlife Art. If you have not been, you must add it to your list. It is the most phenomenal place and a really amazing experience in Jackson Hole. The National Museum of Wildlife Art has had lofty ambitions since its inception in 1987, and Benefactor Group has been fortunate enough to serve as the museum's partner since around 2017, when museum leadership came to us and said, we have a strong board and we want to make it better. We have an ambitious long-term vision. We know we need trustee leadership over the coming decade and beyond that will enable us to guide and execute this vision. So Benefactor Group engaged in a governance assessment that included recommendations around board recruitment strategies, deepening that collegial and collaborative culture on the board, and educating board members about their duties, about philanthropy, and more. The museum took this work really seriously, both staff leadership and volunteer board leadership. They put in place the leadership structures, both at the trustee and staff level, that will set them up for success today. And then they were ready to begin planning for the future. So we reconnected throughout that period of time, but really reconnected about 3 years ago to help develop their philanthropic priorities and assess their internal readiness for a major fundraising initiative. So then together we established the strategy and began rolling out the recommendations and making meaningful progress on that fundraising project. Finally, Benefactor Group partnered with the National Museum of Wildlife Art to hire a director of development. And this was part of the operationalization of some of those readiness steps that were discovered in the previous process. So we were putting the people in place to carry out the strategy within that overall organizational structure and vision. So today we are partners to the museum, providing ongoing fundraising counsel and working together to elevate the museum to new heights. As we embark on this conversation today, on the next slide, you'll see that we keep coming back to 3 buckets: strategy, structure, and people. And I think that those might be helpful ways to compartmentalize this work and the importance of sequencing it in a really thoughtful way in order to set your organization up for success. Of course, today we are focusing on the people, on that last bit. So as we move forward, I invite you to consider this structure and share with us what resonated and what is emerging in your organization as we go through this conversation. Adam, I'll turn it back over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Summers. So to set the stage for the conversation here today, first, we'd like to take a look at the current nonprofit landscape, and in particular, the nonprofit talent landscape. But before I dive into the information I have to share, we'd love to hear from you, get to know you a little bit and understand who you are and the perspectives you bring to this conversation today. So Courtney, if you wouldn't mind initiating the poll. So we'd like to hear from you. How long have you been in your current role, or how long were you in your most recent development role? Trying to get a sense for tenure of the folks who are joining us here this afternoon. Let's close the survey, give folks one last moment to respond. Okay, excellent. So we see a real range of tenures here. I'm really pleased to see so many folks who've been in their current or most recent organizations for more than 5 years. Common industry standard, the best data that we have suggests that average tenure in development roles is significantly less in that 1 to 2 year range. So certainly some of the folks we have on the call here today are aligned with that national data. So now talking a little bit about the interesting moment we find ourselves in the nonprofit sector, would like to start by talking a little bit about some of the conditions that candidates are facing coming into organizations and just the reality of the sector overall. So if we could have the next slide, please. So in keeping with Benefactor's core value of abundance, and I'm starting with some good news. Philanthropy is at the highest level we have ever seen. In 2024 data from Giving USA reported $592 billion in philanthropic contributions. It's never been higher. At the same time, though, demand for nonprofit services is increasing, and many nonprofits are experiencing challenges that are leading to a decrease in staff capacity. Some of the factors that influence that capacity are departures. So as we see here, 70% of employees, nearly 3/4 of staff at nonprofit organizations are considering a new role. And following that, nearly 2/3 of leaders are struggling to fill those vacancies when they arise. In addition, nonprofits are struggling with some shifting factors around cost, rising costs due to inflation, which has an impact on candidate compensation expectations and other things that make it more expensive to hire for new roles than it was previously. In tandem with that, we see a loss of government funding in a lot of sectors, as well as shifts in how people give, changes in contributed revenue sources, which, given some of the recent changes to tax code, we anticipate will only further shift in the future. So all of that is to say, there's a lot going on in the sector, and it's a very dynamic and in some ways challenging time. But before we dig into this conversation further, I would love to hear a little bit from you all again. Thinking about the last role that you were in, the last job you left, or a role you're considering leaving, why was that? What was it that you were struggling with that led to you taking a new role or reconsidering your position in your current organization? All right, so we see a lot of consistency here. Folks are addressing each of these to some extent. So unsustainable scope, insufficient compensation, limited career growth opportunities, lack of support, misalignment. And thankfully, we see here too some folks who aren't considering leaving, which I really appreciate, and we'll dig into that retention piece here in just a moment. So moving on to the next slide, we can see that those themes that you've all expressed very, very closely mirror what the national data show. So the most frequent reason for staff departures from nonprofit roles is too much responsibility and not enough support. This is something that we see at play, in particular in development positions. We also see themes around unsupportive management and leadership, inadequate benefits and compensation, and a lack of professional growth opportunities in current roles. So all factors that we see on the national level, we're hearing from you all here this afternoon. And now I'd like to think more abundantly why people stay. So we have another question for you about what you're looking for, or what makes you likely to stay in a particular role. What does that look like? Excellent. Okay, so primary reasons for staying, we see some strong themes here, strong agreement that supportive management and leadership, adequate benefits and compensation, clear roles and responsibilities, those win the day, but all strong support for all of those reasons. And that too is backed by national data. So when looking at why people stay with current organizations, they talk about a strong onboarding, alignment with the mission, hybrid remote flexibility. That work is incredibly significant, and then a supportive work environment. And the positive news here is that many of these factors are within an organization's control, and don't all cost money. Some of them are more driven by leadership or sort of non-cash benefits. So if organizations may be in a position financially where they're not able to satisfy that top reason, sort of increased compensation, they are able to offer other benefits. So some of the themes that we hear are that there's a sense of purpose and love being a part of a mission-driven organization. That sense of purpose and vision is incredibly important for staff retention. It's equally important for donors. And Summers will talk a little bit about the role that that kind of strategy, a strong fundraising plan and a vision, can inspire your donors and help retain your team, have everyone feel like they're rowing in the same direction. When it comes to supportive and flexible work environments, that hybrid and remote flexibility remains a significant priority for staff and for candidates in the search process. For many organizations, negotiating flexibility in work mode can actually be a tool for landing the right candidate or retaining a high performer. And that's a non-cash benefit to employees. And in fact, studies have shown that employees are willing to place a cash value on that kind of flexibility. And in cases, studies have shown that staff are willing to forego as much as 20% of cash compensation for an otherwise equivalent role that is hybrid or remote. So that's incredibly important and can be a tool for you all as you think about how to retain your teams and build a kind of culture that offers those benefits that best incentivize folks to stay. The other component that we'll talk about in more detail as we look at staffing and structure is a clear professional development pathway for staff. And I would, though, offer a word of caution. Yes, it is important for employees to take on new responsibilities and feel a sense of purpose and trajectory in their work. But as you think about the structure on your staff, ensure that you're rewarding positive performance with responsibilities that align with your staff's goals. We often see a theme, in particular in the fundraising world, where the reward for high performance as a gift officer, successful fundraising as an individual contributor on your team, is management responsibility, which many organizations don't have capacity to really train for, and some frontline fundraisers may not have an appetite for. And so they are rewarded for their strong performance with something that ultimately becomes a disincentive to stay with an organization. So some interesting factors that play here, but all incredibly important to retaining a team. And now I'd love to move to a real world example with Pontier and her team at the museum to hear a little bit more about their team and why they stay and what the culture is like there.
So thank you so much, Adam. That was a great setup for why people stay, why people go. I was looking at the polls rather closely and not surprised by any of that data, and also chagrined by some of that data. So I appreciate that. I try to regularly ask my team what's working for them, what's not working for them, what might prompt them to really enjoy their job and then hopefully stay, and what might prompt them to consider leaving. And those are important conversations, and they can feel delicate at times. So I try to just make sure I time those and that people always know that I'm open to listening to whatever they would like to share with me. I did ask them, I sort of took an internal poll as well, and here's some of the things that they shared about why they choose to stay at the National Museum of Wildlife Art. Accessible leadership is really top to them. Goals tied to the strategic plan. So that tie that you mentioned is very important. Achievable key performance indicators. So I saw in one of the slides, can't reach the goals. That leads to I don't think I can thrive and I need to leave an organization. So the KPIs are important. They need to be achievable so people are feeling like they're winning or they can stretch goals every single month when we look at them. Team culture that prioritizes transparent and two-way communication. So it can go both ways with that open door policy. A recognition of talent and playing to strengths, really seeing people, understanding who they are and what they're good at and where we can move forward with them. Therefore, those growth opportunities that I think most of us enjoy and need to stay at an organization. Respect for the work-family life balance. We're very much attuned to that here in Jackson Hole, simply because we know we're far away for most people. They're far away from their nuclear families, if you will, the families of origin, and they didn't move to Jackson Hole to work 37 hours a day. So we try to make sure to adhere to that and model that ourselves. Flexibility with schedules. We do have a hybrid policy for the workers that can do that. Some of our frontline staff, greeting guests and working in our shop, they don't have that privilege generally, but we try to offer that when we can. And then I just added one last thing, which is just to have a culture of fun. We celebrate birthdays, we celebrate anniversaries, we just celebrate as much as we possibly can. And I think that's when you go to work and you're with friends and colleagues and it feels like we spend so much of our lives at work. That's, I think, also really important to retention.
Thank you, Pontier. So now that we've had a chance to explore some of the conditions that help Pontier retain her high-performing team and more broadly, some of the things that cause people to leave organizations or join organizations, I'd like to transition to some practical strategies. And in particular, given the seat that I'm in at Benefactor, supporting organizations with the search for nonprofit talent, specifically, I'd like to talk a little bit more about what organizations can do leading up to a search and during a hiring process that can set your candidate up for success and help your team really wrap their arms around an incoming leader or member of your team. So if we could see the next slide. So in our search practice, we talk with a lot of candidates about their current and past roles and specifically what their experience was like joining an organization, onboarding, and really learning the ropes of a new organization. We hear a lot of consistent themes, and all of these are at play in any organization, regardless of whether they are struggling to retain their teams. But the degree to which people are experiencing them can vary pretty significantly and is a significant factor in informing someone's success. So first off is leadership dynamics and expectations. What do leaders at an organization expect of someone coming into a role? In many cases, those expectations are unrealistic. An organization that might be struggling financially wants to bring in a fundraiser to right the ship, as it were. And fundraising takes time. Building those relationships, building a plan, and finally executing that plan takes time. And a fundraiser who comes in with an expectation of significantly shifting the financial reality of an organization in the first 6 months or even a year is not going to be set up for success. And so understanding what those expectations are, having that clarity is incredibly important. I think it's also important that those expectations be realistic. And often when we are thinking about roles within an organization, in particular with organizations that may have a small team, we see a phenomenon that I often refer to as the everything but the kitchen sink director of development, someone who oversees grants, individual fundraising, both at the major gift and annual fund level, someone who also executes events and corporate sponsorships. It is too much. It is unsustainable. And so how can you craft a role that optimizes those functions where an organization can realize the most revenue, bring in the most dollars to support their missions, while also setting a candidate up for success with a reasonable workload? We also see challenges for candidates coming into new roles in organizational culture and staff trust. Often with organizations that are dealing with departures, we see staff take on new responsibilities during a search process or during a transition. A role may be vacant and others step up. There can be challenges in the culture if those staff feel that they were never appropriately compensated for or really even acknowledged or thanked for those contributions during a difficult transition season. And that can be incredibly challenging. In some cases, those are responsibilities that staff are eager to take on and would like to see continue. And in other cases, they may have carried them through for the search process and are happy to relinquish them with someone new coming in. But those conversations need to be explicit. What are you doing now to see us through the transition? And what will you do when a new person comes in? What will they do? And how will we share this together to all work together to support our mission? So there needs to be an appropriate process for gathering feedback leading up to and throughout a search process. And then finally, financial realities. Too often, candidates come into roles without an understanding of an organization's financial reality. That can vary in degrees. It can be a challenge to overcome. It can also be devastating. Organizations that may have significant financial challenges that were not previewed to a candidate can lead to them leaving sooner rather than later because they recognize it's a challenge that can't be confronted. So in all of these cases, these kinds of challenges that we're seeing can be prevented by a thoughtful discovery process that looks at an organization's current conditions, its aspirations, and helps bring the team together around a shared vision for the organization and for the role. So everyone understands how they work together now and how a new member of their team will support their work together in the future. And I often hear that candidates like this kind of transparency in the search process. Any candidate understands going into a role, there are going to be challenges as well as opportunities. Sharing them at the outset, sharing them in your position descriptions that you're posting, that you're using to recruit, talking about those challenges early and often can actually inspire a candidate to step into a role or to apply for a position because they understand that leadership at the organization is aware of those challenges. They're looking for a partner in the candidate in confronting those challenges. And they're really conducting a search process that speaks to those challenges specifically. So it's matching the talent on the team and the needs of an organization and can significantly increase the chances for success in a search process and moving forward. I have seen a couple of questions come into the chat. Courtney, did you want to pause?
Yeah, let's take a pause and answer some of those.
Yeah.
This one we got, how should organizations think about incentive pay or performance bonuses for fundraisers? Where does that get complicated?
Oh, that's an incredibly important one. I'm happy to take a first stab, and Pontier and Summers would love to hear from you as well, if that sounds good. But I think incentive pay can be very valuable. I think a couple of important considerations. First off, many of your fundraisers are very goal-oriented. They will be motivated by the opportunity to earn an incentive, to meet a goal, really rise to the occasion. So the psychology works. A couple of things to consider. First off is ethics. Those bonuses should not be tied to dollars raised. They can be tied to meeting goals, but they shouldn't be tied to actually closing a gift. That can create a conflict of interest in the solicitation process and doesn't best represent a donor's intentions. The other factor to consider is creating a sense of competition among your team. So how can you create incentives that are more heavily weighted towards shared goals rather than individual goals? So there's not a sense of competition for who gets credit for a particular gift that could lead to unbalanced portfolios or other things that could impact how your team works together and undermine that spirit of collective that collective spirit. Summers or Pontier, anything to add to that?
I think it's a really great question, and you hit on some of the important things. I think it's important to have the right metrics in place for where you want to go and what you want your program to be doing. So if you're really focused on retention and acquisition, then some of your metrics should be focused on that. And yes, to your point, Adam, awarding performance-based compensation based on total dollars raised or milestones achieved is excellent, whereas you need to steer away from it ever being tied to any one single gift. But I think around 3 to 5 total metrics and making sure that there are both leading indicators and lagging indicators. A leading indicator might be donor engagement, and are you hitting that 80% threshold on a rolling average of having donors engaged? Lagging might be hitting that milestone fundraising number collectively as a group. The other important thing I'll say is it's so beneficial when one of the biggest components of that performance-based compensation is a team-based goal that does wonders for the culture and makes sure that you are rewarding the experience that is beneficial and most joyful for the donor, for stakeholders, for trustees, and for staff. So making sure that there's some team-based approach there is really critical as well. And I know Pontier has been thinking about this alongside other leadership at the museum and how do we incorporate this into our work every day? So I'd be curious to hear her reactions as well.
Yeah, we feel very strongly that this needs to be introduced for our team and also a position that we're currently seeking to fill. And so to not only attract talent, but retain talent. And the team-based approach is how we look at our work here anyway. So that's something that we're very focused on. So we're really eager to move forward and develop something and articulate something that's just right for us.
Great, thanks everyone. Another one of our attendees asks, I know that there are so many factors at play, but how many development staff should a $4 million nonprofit have on average?
Oh, I hate to respond with exactly the sort of preface to that question, but it really does depend on so many factors that an organization is dealing with in terms of their sources of revenue, the types, the number of donors that might be giving to get to that $4 million threshold. So I'm not trying to be cagey, but it can really run the gamut. I think there are organizations that could be successful with 1 or 2 fundraisers, raising $4 million a year, depending on those sources. But many organizations would need significantly more support, depending on the diversity of their financial model. Anything to add to that, Summers or Pontier?
No, I think you covered it. Factors at play, donor base and program goals, where you want to go, what your trajectory is, but it could range from, I'm thinking of one client we're working with right now who has about 4 people in their department raising around $4 million a year, and then thinking about the National Museum of Wildlife Art and others who are hitting and exceeding those thresholds and thinking about that with 7, 8 people because of their growth ambitions and the special sort of initiatives they're pursuing right now.
Yeah.
Runs the gamut.
Yeah, there are a couple of tried and true rules of thumb. If you have someone who is serving entirely in a frontline fundraising role, they don't have management responsibilities, they're not performing a lot of administrative duties. They are a frontline fundraiser, a major gifts officer, or a corporate or foundation grant gifts officer. A portfolio of 75 to 100 donors or prospects is typically a reasonable threshold. And that means if you are in an organization with a $10,000 major gifts threshold, you could be expected to realize between $750,000 and $1 million in revenue annually. But that can really run the gamut, and $10,000 is not a uniform major gifts threshold. It really needs to be defined by an organization and their unique conditions.
We have time for one more. I think it's a good one.
Okay, great.
Okay. How much does board culture affect fundraiser retention, and what can staff leadership do about it?
I'll take the first stab and would love to hear from you, Pontier and Summers. Board culture has a tremendous impact on staff retention and on philanthropy in an organization in general. Boards are often those who say to an executive director or a CEO, hire a fundraiser when you're in a financial challenge without recognizing that there's a lot of work that needs to go into actually having that fundraiser realize significant revenue for the organization. So realistic expectations from the board can significantly increase a candidate's desire to stay with an organization. And an executive director or CEO should be the one really working with the board to set those realistic expectations, and should have the trust of the board in holding a fundraiser accountable to those expectations. I think the other component that can increase likelihood of retaining a donor is a board member's or the board's culture of generosity when it comes to their role in philanthropy, their willingness to give personally, their willingness to open doors and support a fundraiser in building those kinds of connections that can advance their work. So I think those are some of the factors that play, but would love to hear from Summers or Pontier other things that other ways that board can influence staff retention, particularly in fundraising roles.
I can speak to that. Everything, Adam, you said is so important. Board members are, for many fundraisers, the door to a whole new audience that we may not be meeting ourselves. We certainly have our own circle of influence, but they have a different circle of influence, and they are often the peer that can be in join us at a meeting and say, hey, we're friends and I want to tell you about this organization I'm passionate about. Might you consider supporting it? And they can broaden our audience in a way that we have a hard time doing all by ourselves. In addition, our board is fantastic about getting to know the staff. And I think every staff member, we have 34, 33 people who are full-time here at the museum, appreciate that the board members know their names. And I realize with larger organizations, that's much harder to do, but people notice it, they feel valued. And when it comes to retention, just to know that literally like the Cheers bar, for those of you of a certain generation know what that means. When someone knows your name, it really does matter. And our board really does take the time. At our quarterly board meetings, we introduce new staff as well at any level. So I think that I can't say enough about that two-way street with board members. And it's also meaningful when they attend our advancement committee meetings and they share their work with other organizations, what might be working. Of course, they open their homes and hold events. So I think that the chemistry between staff and board needs to be really healthy, positive, and therefore the impact and what we can do as an organization is exponentially grown.
Absolutely. And I think, Pontier, having seen firsthand how you model a culture of philanthropy from the top, you, the executive director, others at the organization, and this is such a small thing, but make sure philanthropy is on every single board meeting agenda in some form. It doesn't always have to be the report out. It shouldn't be. It should be engaging. It should be telling stories, but connected back every single time. And don't let that slip. That's how the board starts to feel their role in fundraising as second nature. It's just part of what they do and helps it become just a natural fit.
We have another question in the chat, but I think let's continue on and we will address it in the Q&A section a little bit later.
Excellent. Thank you, Courtney. Then with that, I would love to talk about our work with Pontier and her team on a search for a director of development that started in 2024. We had the great privilege of supporting with that search. It was a national search for a fundraising leader, reporting directly to Pontier. And there were a number of interesting factors at play during our preparatory phases of the search that I think are relevant to the discussion here today. So first off was really the definition of the role. This was a restructuring of the team at the time. And so we had a lot of levers to play with when it came to what exactly the job description looked like. And we're able to optimize that for the market, what kind of talent was likely to be available, and also for the team structure, how would this role best support collaboration of a very tight-knit team. We ultimately landed in our process on a very general title, Director of Development. That could mean just about anything at an organization, but this wasn't one of those everything but the kitchen sink Director of Development roles. In our process, we worked with Pontier and with the leadership at the museum to identify what the focus would be for the role. And in this particular case, it was on annual fundraising, membership, and prospect identification for major gifts. So some of that qualification work. It was a general title, but a very focused role scope. In that work, we also talked about some of the sort of special initiatives planning, the vision setting that we did with the museum and with the staff there. And in the process of our discovery, before we posted a role, before we finalized a position, we talked to the team, talked about their aspirations. That open culture is something we know from Pontier's slide earlier. We know that keeps team members there, and it helps build their support for a new person coming into the team before you even get a start on a search process. So that's incredibly important, and those were some of the factors that we needed to consider. But we also needed to consider the market. So the fact that this was a role focused on annual giving and membership suggested that museum experience was likely to be a great asset for someone coming into this role. The realities of Jackson is that there are only 2 other museums, much smaller, in Jackson. And so there weren't necessarily candidates locally who had the museum-specific experience that we were looking for, or who necessarily worked in environments with a strong portfolio management system and a strong sort of annual giving program. So it was a challenging search. And also we were dealing with some challenging market factors, like a very high cost of living in Jackson. And the fact that when we ultimately got to interviews, it was in late fall, early winter. And so as candidates were considering relocation for a role, in addition to cost of living, they were considering weather. So all important factors that we were considering in that process, but we had conversations about each of them, surfaced them in the profile, and really kept them front of mind to ensure that by the time we were talking to candidates and certainly putting candidates in front of museum leadership, everyone had an understanding of some of those challenges and the opportunities, and everyone was aligned and rowing in the same direction. Pontier, what might you add to sort of our work together and what we were looking for in a fundraising leader?
Well, first off, it was just superlative work. Adam, you and your team were easy to work with, very responsive, easy to reach. Everything was prepared for us beautifully. Always felt very well supported in the entire process. So hats off to you for your good work there. I think that the biggest challenge, that you've named them all, a strong cultural fit with Jackson Hole is imperative to be happy in what we think is, the center of the universe and the most beautiful place on earth. To others is remote, cold, and far away from where they came from. And so we know that we were looking for people who loved mountain culture. And I believe our top candidates were all people who were drawing from mountain cultures. And indeed, the excellent candidate who did become our director of development came from a mountain culture. And so that becomes really important to us. A willingness to learn. If we were bringing someone into the role who possibly had tangential skills and was wanting to grow in their role, that willingness, that growth mindset is really important to us. And then finally, someone who does like a metric-driven fundraising strategy. That is important to us. That's what's going to further us. And so someone who's comfortable with looking at various levels of the way we measure ourselves is important as well. I think sometimes people are coming from smaller development shops where metrics aren't as meaningful or as in place, other than is the number up or is the number down. So we try to make sure that pathway to success is a little better articulated, and there are lots of ways to be successful rather than just the final, have we hit goal?
Those were some really important and interesting insights from Adam and Pontier, both the real world application and what you've seen across hundreds of searches, Adam. And hiring people is a critical first step, but what's equally important is what comes afterward. So in my mind, it's an individual's decision to leave an organization, but it is the organization's decision to empower people to stay. That opportunity rests with you as an organization leader. And we at Benefactor Group believe in the importance of investing in the infrastructure, the tools, and the resources that enable people to stay, to want to grow in this job that they are in. So I want to ask a question, and I'm curious about this. How many people on this call work at an organization that has a fundraising plan in place? All right, so I am actually very encouraged by this response. So 59% of people said, yes, we have a fundraising plan in place. 17% said they were unsure, and 24% said no. So I would say that's higher than expected and then average from the sort of benefactor group cohort of people that we work with prior to creating a fundraising plan. So kudos to those of you who have thought about it and invested in that. And it is not uncommon to not have one. So, or to be unsure, that means that there's work to be done to communicate whether that plan is in place or what we need to do to get there. So a fundraising plan is absolutely critical. And I think as we advance to the next slide, we'll see a little bit there. It helps with identifying and tracking goals, keeping accountability across the team, and garnering buy-in and support from leadership. It's absolutely critical that a strong plan includes those really clear goals and measures of success so that everyone knows where you are heading and what they will be measured and held accountable against, that people understand their distinct role in that plan. Not everyone is doing everything. So who is doing what and why are those metrics weighted more heavily? And I see a question that we'll answer in a little bit about some examples of team goals for a diverse team that might include different people from different departments. And that's exactly the right mindset to have. A fundraising plan should point back to those goals and the strategies to achieve those targets. Buy-in from board and staff leadership, the importance of that cannot be understated. That question about board culture, I think, really speaks to that. You must be working with the top level leadership of the organization and your board members in order to say, here's the rationale for investing in our fundraising program upfront, for growing our philanthropy program today. So you cannot springboard and launch from that place without having the resources in order to say, we need to get our CRM in order. We need to think about the structure of our team. We need to think about how we're going to build a major gifts program. So making sure to communicate with, and that's why I go back to saying have philanthropy on every single board agenda, making sure that you are communicating with leadership, with board members, and saying this is the importance of investing in that fundraising infrastructure, and having a fundraising plan that everyone understands is absolutely critical. We often think of an assessment in 4 key questions. Who are you now? So what does it look like today to work at the National Museum of Wildlife Art or to work at another amazing organization? Who could you be? What is the potential out there? What are other peers like you doing? What are other organizations in your city or town or state doing? How will you get there? And who will you ultimately be? So those are the key pieces of saying, now we know that the potential that's out there in our donor base, in the institutional funding space, and among the strategies we have identified, but now we're going to commit and execute that. So who will we be and how will we get there? And I would argue that there is no better time to do this than in alignment with thinking about your team and the hires you are making, because a good plan gives people a roadmap, gives people clarity around expectations, it gives people opportunities for growth. And going back to that staggering statistic Adam shared about the importance of onboarding for keeping people at your organization, it makes your onboarding more successful because you know exactly what you are sharing with new hires. I'm going to keep the next slide very short because I want to make sure we have time to get to some more questions that are being submitted. And I want to invite Pontier to share a little bit about your approach to capacity building as well. We think about capacity building and the characteristics of a high-performing organization going hand in hand with those same characteristics that provide clarity and help retain talent. So when we think about that, we think about strategy, we think about people, process, technology, and culture. And that's a great way to think about developing your own annual fundraising plan. Those first 4, people, process, technology, and culture, think of those as the foundation upon which the house is built. And from there, you can build out the individual strategies for your individual major giving program or your annual fundraising program, for membership, for events, if those are a part of your strategy, for corporate and foundation giving. So there are other characteristics that are absolutely essential as well. And I think the importance of partnering with leadership is paramount, as well as a strong culture of philanthropy. and making sure that those intentional pathways for growth are built into the plan. So Pontier, I would love for you to just share briefly sort of how the National Museum of Wildlife Art is thinking about your fundraising plan and where you'll go from here.
Well, we're excited about crafting our fundraising plan. We certainly have had one, and now we're going to, bust it out for the next 3 years, really looking at financial analysis, a lot of donor data, and we're working with you, Summers, in putting that together, and we're pretty excited about that. Some other changes that we're making as part of our work with you is I'll be shifting from my Chief Advancement Officer role to the Principal Philanthropic Advisor role, so I can work with individuals and families on their potential plans, and if they're aligned with the museum, sort of more transformative gifts. We're going to add in my lieu a Director of Philanthropy who will oversee our annual programs. And there are several positions that we have that are fully remote. Our development director has shifted to a completely virtual membership and annual giving manager. We also have a development coordinator, and we also have a grants manager. And so there are some roles in the fundraising team, if you will, that can be fully remote. There's so much of our work is happening through our CRM and research, and so much is needed that I feel very blessed to have such a great remote team, but I do need another person to work alongside me for what I call sort of boots on the street, in-person work. For example, we have an opening at the museum tonight, and it's so great to have somebody there welcoming guests and doing that stewardship and ambassadorship. And as we mentioned earlier, we're introducing a bonus structure to retain and initially attract talent. So we're very excited about that.
And we have a question in the chat, Pontier. What does that bonus structure look like?
I think
Really good question. And we're still figuring it out, but I think some things that we want to make sure is that the team is rewarded versus the individual, because from the person at the front of the house to the gift coordinator who sends the acknowledgement letter and everything in between, there are a lot of people making sure that that gift happens and it's stewarded correctly. So we're trying to make sure that that team culture is really embraced. When we have our KPIs, our key performance indicators for what we have right now, there are things sort of how many community events have you been attending? How many actions have you performed? Have they been resulting in gifts? Things that can really show that moves forward management. We want to try to build as much of that into the bonus structure as we can. So at this point, I wish I could be more specific, but I know that we are really passionate about it and hope to have something crafted maybe within the next month.
absolutely. And someone else asked about examples of team goals for a diverse development team that would be appropriate to tie to incentives. So I'll share a few examples. I think you should pick around 3 to 5. You don't want to overbuild or overcomplicate things. One might be overall fundraising targets, the total dollar amount that your team collectively is raising for the organization. And that team-based goal, you might want it to be around 50% of that total performance-based compensation. Some other examples of metrics that you might want to tie to performance-based compensation would be number of new donors or retention. So look at your current retention rate and set it higher in accordance with where you want to go. Someone who is focused on membership, for example, might have their performance-based compensation weighted more heavily toward acquisition and retention. The number of solicitations at or above a certain dollar amount for frontline fundraisers can be really effective. And notice I said solicitation conversations. That helps overcome maybe a fear of asking or the idea that you have to secure every single gift that you're asking for. Encourages people to swing appropriately big in partnership with that donor and crafting those conversations. Donor engagement, as we mentioned before. So are you hitting that 80% threshold on a rolling basis for the donors that you are engaging in meaningful ways, not just, that one-way communication, but really meaningful two-way engaged opportunities. Qualification and equally important disqualification is a really great one if you're looking at, again, building that donor base, acquiring donors, and building your major gifts program. And any organization, but especially if you're in a higher education environment, a hospital, or a museum, you might consider a metric for the number of collaborative solicitations.
Great insights. Now we have just a couple minutes left for any additional questions that might be on your mind. Please feel free to put them in the chat. Even if we don't have time to get to them, we'll do our best to address any of those questions in writing and follow up, or if you feel like self-identifying when asking those questions, we're happy to reach out to you directly to talk through it. Thank you both, Summers and Pontier, for all the insights you've shared with us here this afternoon, and for sharing your personal experiences in addition to your expertise. Excellent question from Edie. The difference between a director of development and a director of philanthropy. Pontier, are you able to, in our last couple of minutes, speak to some of those distinctions as you're thinking about them?
Sure. I've been asked the same thing, and I even asked the same thing. So I think it's a shift in understanding of what we do in our work. So development has a sort of pedantic side to it. It's like developing fundraising, developing gifts, developing this program. Philanthropy refers to the larger understanding that a person might have about their giving. So it's just a different, a larger, maybe more vaulted view of the fundraising activity. So when I meet with people, for example, I try to really understand what is motivating them to even meet with me and or come to an event. And if they might think of supporting this, I know that they have a lot of decisions that they have to make with their own family. You know, most people have many, many places where they want to give and support. Why are they choosing the National Museum of Wildlife Art? To me, that's a philanthropic discussion rather than just a development discussion. So, and Summers, I know in the 30 seconds I've left you, I believe that that's also a change in nomenclature for the industry itself to change from development to philanthropy. So I want to shoot that off to Summers, and thank you for allowing me to answer that.
Absolutely. Well said, Pontier. You described it beautifully when you were talking about this shift in your role to your team. You said, I see my duty to serve as a philanthropic advisor to families making decisions about their investments. And I think it's all about that culture, how you're treating it, how you're building it. And it reminds me a lot of Laura MacDonald's, our principal and founders article from asking to advising. So it rang some bells there. I know have hit the top of the hour and want to wrap up on time. So a huge thank you to everyone who joined, and please feel free to reach out to us. I think our information is on the next slide. We're happy to talk to you, happy to chat hiring, strategy, structure, and all of the above.